joining me today. I want to talk to you about royal icing. I want to talk through several different recipes. I want to talk through the different consistencies and uses of it. I want to talk about how to store it, how to clean it up. Royal icing is really a misunderstood medium, and to me, I think it's really magical. There's so many different things that you can do with it, and I think a lot of people are a little intimidated by it just because it's a non-fat based icing. And with the egg whites, I think that tends to scare people off a little bit because of the safety of that. But we're going to talk through several things, and I think at the end of the video that you're going to be really excited about using it yourself. One of the most classic recipes of royal icing is basically based on the egg white itself. If you're going to use a real egg white, what I want you to do is crack it open and put it in the fridge overnight. What that does is let it relax. Today we don't really use the real egg whites so much because they're not pasteurized, and there is a little bit of a danger of salmonella. So we have a lot of other different products that are a lot more easy to use. The first one I'm going to show you is the royal icing mix, and there's a recipe on the back of this. This is a 1-pound unit that we sell at Sweetwise, and it adds 5 tablespoons of water. And you don't have to mix the entire container. You can do little bits at a time. So if you only need like maybe a couple of tablespoons of royal icing, then you can just use a little bit of this instead of the whole container. Now, with any royal icing mix, when it says add X amount of tablespoons of water, always start with less than that and work up to that, because you can always add a little bit more, but you can't really take it back out. You can add a little bit of powdered sugar, but when you go too far in that direction of it being too watery, then you're messing with the balance of the meringue powder that's in there, and it just kind of messes with the stability of it. One reason that you don't want to add too much water at one time is basically kind of just depending on the humidity and the weather outside. If it's like a really humid, rainy day, something like that, it kind of tends to absorb into that icing. So especially on those days, if you'll back off on your water a little bit and just kind of test your consistency as you're mixing it up, you're going to have a much better end product that's going to give you the look that you want on those specific types of weather days. The next recipe that I'm going to use, I really like using this one a lot because I have a lot of control over it. It's basically a meringue powder based recipe. I think you're probably always going to want to weigh your ingredients for this. One thing is, like, especially with our meringue powder, it stays really, really fresh. We sell it in small batches and get it every month. People have even commented on the smell of it, that it smells so fresh. With that though, the meringue powder is going to be lighter. So a 1/4 cup of our meringue powder to a 1/4 cup of someone else's meringue powder might be different. So therefore, you want to weigh it. It doesn't matter what the volume is so much, but the weight's going to be the same. And we do sell it by weight, so you're not being shorted on that. But the meringue powder recipe, what I like to use is 1 pound of powdered sugar. Again, sift that and weigh it yourself. Even if the container says it's a pound, I always double check it. 1 pound of powdered sugar, 1 1/4 ounces of meringue powder. I use 1 tablespoon of glucose. Now what this does is it adds a little bit of stretchiness. It's a really similar consistency to the royal icing, so it's not like you're adding corn syrup that's going to thin it down too much. But the stretchiness really helps a lot, especially when you're doing string work, things like that. And then as far as the water content, roughly 2 ounces. Again, be a little bit flexible on that, just depending on the conditions of your environment. If it's a humid environment, then you're going to need a little bit less water. If it's very dry, then you're going to add a little bit more so it's not so brittle. Whatever recipe you decide to use, I would suggest that you let it rest overnight. Now I'm going to show you how to store that as you're letting it rest, but let me show you first the purpose of that. If you're going to do a color flow, and let me explain to you, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, royal icing and color flow are pretty much the same thing, except color flow has a little bit more water in it, so it's thinner. The reason you would use color flow is something like projects like this to have like puffy letters. Really classic look is to make a collar that would sit on a cake, things like that. It really looks great on cookies. It's one of my favorite things to put on a cookie as far as icing. But if you look really closely at this, I mixed this up and then poured it right away. And you can see the air bubbles in there. And if the color flow, if you let it rest overnight, those are going to fall out and then you're going to have a much prettier icing. Let me show you this one really quickly that I made earlier. And I really like to use a squeeze bottle. But the color flow consistency, if you'll see this, it holds its shape for a couple of seconds and then it falls out. And you can just kind of shake it down and it really holds its effect there and has a really pretty glossy look to it. One way you can get an extra glossy look is if you will, as soon as you pipe this out, put a desk lamp shining right on it, and it's really going to take out that dullness. It's going to give it a real nice shininess to it. Another one of the color flow things, I mentioned this briefly before, we can just get a close-up over here, is the letters that you can do. And you can basically see that there's a thin border of an outline here. You can do any font that you want to. If you want to go refer to another video we have on the puffy letters, these are really fun when they dry real thoroughly. You can stand them upright or put them on the side of a cake, but it's a really nice way to do lettering. It's a little bit different. Another of the same, with the Royal Icing Color Flow mix that you can do is you can put a board covering and you can just pour out your color flow. This is obviously one that's a little bit thinner, but again, you can control that consistency. It's just going to flow a little bit better. You can cover a board with this, and that way it can match your cake instead of, and you would obviously go all the way to the edge and put a little bit more on here, but you can see that covering the board in a royal icing really gives you a nicer look, and it kind of matches the theme that you're going with as well. I talked a little bit first in this section about storing it because you want to store it overnight. So let me just undo this and show you the proper way to do it. First thing, let me point out, this is in a plastic bowl. I kind of have a rule of thumb that you never put royal icing in a plastic bowl or use plastic utensils unless it's designated only for your royal icing in your kitchen. And the reason for that is if you've ever mixed anything in here that has fat in it, like a buttercream icing or any other kind of like a quick batter, that sort of thing, it can retain that fat in the plastic and actually leach into your royal icing, which can break it down. So unless you have a designated plastic bowl for your royal icing, don't mix it in that. Use metal or glass. Okay, so going back to how to store this, basically the royal icing is in here and I just cover it with a damp paper towel right on the surface, and I make sure I push all of that down. And then I put plastic wrap, especially if I only have a little bit of icing in the bowl, because I don't want the air that's in here to leach through that paper towel. So I'm going to put plastic right on top of that. And then I'm going to go ahead and wrap the whole container really tightly in plastic. Okay, just get a nice tight wrap on all of that so it doesn't get dried out. And that's the proper way to store something that you've mixed overnight. What you'll want to do if you're traveling with the royal icing, I'm going to have a bag here, and if you'll notice that I have it sealed from both ends. I have the bag tie on this end, and I'm going to show you how I want to cover this end. I just have a baggie here and another damp paper towel, not soaking wet because you don't want to get this too wet, but I'll just wrap this around the end. So now I have both ends sealed so no air can get in there, and then I'm just going to put it inside my baggie and carry it with me. And then that way, if you're going, let's say you're going on site to a wedding and you need to pipe a border on there, then you have your icing all nice and sealed and it's not going to dry out. Royal icing dries out really quickly. It does dry nice and firm, something you'd see like the icicles on a gingerbread house, that sort of thing. But you do need to take caution to make sure it's not drying out before you're ready for it to. So that's the basics of royal icing. Again, take a look at the Sweetwise Royal Icing Mix. It's really great for just a little bit at a time, or just you're in a bind and just need to add water. With the meringue powder, you have a little bit more of an economics thing going on because you have your own powdered sugar that you're using, but this really gives a really great consistent product and a lot of durability. The color flow, I really love working with. I hope you try that on your cookies and other different projects. Take a look at some of our other royal icing and color flow videos that we have, and I think you're going to find some really fun projects to do. But that's kind of the basics of how to use royal icing, and I appreciate you watching today. Have fun with it.